Welcome to another episode of Home Sweet Home. My name is Rod McCall.
And I'm Scott Nichols.
Oh my gosh, man, how is life treating you on this fantastic day?
I mean, it's been great.
Yeah?
Yeah. I'm having a good day.
I am glad to hear
I'm
that.
having a great week. It's been a good month.
Oh, well, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. How about you?
Well, my internship is going to be kicking off here soon, and so I'm looking forward to that.
Awesome.
Get to put into practice what I've been learning in the classroom for a number of years. I'm almost done, so I'm super excited about that.
So awesome.
But it got me thinking. Well, the news is filled with all kinds of political stuff.
Oh, goodness.
And I as a government teacher, I sometimes I like to talk about politics and political things, but it is so hard to talk
Sure.
because people like to get into arguments.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, and you see stuff on social media, and I want to respond.
Mm-hmm.
And because the stuff I see is pretty slanted right, slanted left, but pretty slanted.
Yes, it is.
I even ran across a news story that was talking about, it was a fact check about a 10-year-old research paper about how illegals are voting. Right. And it was a fact check showing, well, no, it's not happening, blah, 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 blah. And I thought, man, because they even give me the option to share on Facebook. And I thought, oh, put this out there for people so that they can, learn for themselves.
Mm.
And then I go, wait a minute.
Yeah.
No. One, if they're reading it, it's going to create all kinds of issues. And two, nobody really cares because social media platforms aren't a place to have dialogue about an issue. It's a way to just rant and attack people for not thinking like they do. And so it got me thinking a little bit about something we went to back early in, what was that, January?
Yeah, January, February or something like that.
Okay. So when we went to the Bush Presidential Library back whenever it was, and we listened to the governor of Utah and the governor of Kansas talk about how to disagree better.
Sure. And let's preface this by the governor of Utah is Republican and the governor of Kansas is a Democrat.
Okay, yes.
And they actually talked to each other.
They did.
And it's great.
In a friendly way, too. They even joked and laughed. And, it was very interesting. And so I ran across an article from Parade Magazine. And I thought it was pretty good. I mean, Parade Magazine, I've been reading for years. They've always been in the Sunday paper.
Sure.
And so they had an interesting article. And I thought, well, I would maybe merge the two. But it was titled, it was written by a psychologist who is board certified, even has an Instagram account with over 160,000 followers.
Wow.
And anyway, she was talking about how to talk to people. And so I thought, well, I'll blend the two together. And so the National Governors Association, of which the governor of Utah, I'm embarrassed to say I don't remember his name. That's so horrible. I'm sorry to say I do not remember his name. Anyway, he is the head of the National Governors Association, and his goal or his platform as being the head of the National Governors Association was to chair the initiative titled How to Disagree Better.
And his name, by the way, is Spencer Cox.
Oh my God, I am so embarrassed. Fantastic guy, very comical. I'd love to see him on the national stage. But between mixing the two, I thought maybe we could explore ways to have a conversation rather than people wanting to argue. And I don't mind a spirited conversation or debate. I mean,
Sure.
that's called civil discourse. Okay. I know you talk about it. I talk about it in class, that we don't have to agree. We don't have to like what the others are saying, but we can talk about it showing respect, civil
Sure.
discourse, because maybe we could learn something.
I don't think that, I think that the main stage, and maybe let's see if you agree, the main stage out there for people to have discussion now, it seems to be social media.
Okay.
The problem with it that I see is, and I've removed myself from commenting on things because it's useless.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with it is that nobody wants to actually discuss anything. They want to scream at you what they believe, and if you don't believe that too, then you're wrong.
Yes.
And so that's not discourse. That's just yelling, right?
Mm-hmm.
It'd be akin to if you had people in a room, you had 50 people in a room and they all were just shouting at each other.
Mm-hmm.
There's no learning taking place. There's no reflection. There's no real argument or convincing going on. It's just screaming at you. And so these are just the keyboard warriors, right?
Mm-hmm.
That are just out there shouting at you and convincing nobody of anything. It's entirely useless in as so far as the historical debate of the country would go, right? Like where we would have debate that would be meaningful. And it's one of those things that, as I think back to my childhood, right? Like one of the things that was always said was, there's a couple things you don't talk about: religion and politics.
Yeah.
Right? So you'd be in a group setting, right? And you just don't talk about religion or politics. Why? Because those are the things that everybody really disagrees about and have very closely held beliefs on it. And you're probably not going to convince them of anything. So talk about other things, right? And what seems to have happened is on social media, that's all people talk about. Religion and politics. And it's miserable. And so I can see why some of the younger generation is like, I don't look at Facebook. That's an older generation thing, right? Because everything that's on there seems to be religion or politics, and they're not interested. And they become even more disinterested in it, right? Like it's really not helping things because they're becoming more disinterested in it because of how they see adults and older generations acting on these platforms, right? And so they gravitate more towards something like TikTok, where they can just see fun stuff.
Sure.
Right? So I think that we need to get back to some kind of learning, right? Some kind of reflection, some kind of really looking at, facts and being able to discuss them in a way that's going to produce something useful.
And that is why I found and thoroughly enjoyed listening to the two governors present at the Bush Library. And while not everybody, can be there or wasn't there,
it is available online.
Well, that's true. And the website is really cool. It's if you just Google how to disagree better, it'll take you to the website.
Yeah.
But what I liked about what the psychologist was saying in this Parade magazine, she provided some very interesting phrases that I thought, I've actually used some of these, which is why I like the article, I think. I maybe be a little biased. But I found that they have been effective for me in helping channel, somebody's attempt to argue. And when I say argue, it's like what you were saying, argue their point and their point only without the idea that there might be another side. There might be another option. And we talk about this in class all the time.
Sure.
Every class, every semester, Again,
we teach something called argumentative, right? I teach writing, right? That's argumentative essay. And the whole point of an argumentative essay, right, is to present a position and then persuade using evidence somebody towards that side, but you also give the other position, right? So you have to understand the other position or another position in light of your position, right? So you're having to look at all sides of this, and that's something that people don't do. Right? Well, they consume opinions and then align themselves with whatever opinions they're consuming.
Yes, and they create an echo chamber of their own creation. All of your social media platforms use a similar algorithm, whether it's YouTube, Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram.
Which, by the way, is to make money.
Yes, not to spread civil discourse, but they help you limit your exposure to different ideas. And so that's where we as individuals can go back, and when you're at the family gathering, because there's it's summertime, a lot of family gatherings, but we do this even outside of summer, Thanksgiving, Christmas, holidays, whatever it might be, birthdays. And so when these kinds of conversations begin, and that one family member goes on that rant, tirade, whatever, some ways to channel, diffuse, to refocus the conversation, I like some of these beginning phrases. And that were in this Parade magazine article. And the first one starts with, I hear you, but this is how I see it. And in this, you're kind of sharing, I hear you. You're validating them. But you're also starting your side by, but this is how I see it. You and I have experienced life differently. Everybody, there's no two people that have gone through life exactly the same. And so as a consequence, their exposure to life has changed or influenced their perspective. And their perspective is how we take in the events that have happened and how we respond to those events.
So far be it from me to critique psychologists on this, but I would take I would change that stem a little bit.
Okay.
And I would remove one word. Right. So I could say, I hear you. This is what I see, or this is what I think. Right? I would leave out the but.
Oh,
because I think the but negates the I hear you.
Okay. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Right. So
what you're sharing ultimately though is that this is a two-way conversation.
Right.
And that when emotions are high, it is, and instead of attack, it's a way to help lower the emotional response, and you're trying to get them to lessen their pedestal stance. And so, again, so yes, I can see your point in getting rid of the word but. So substituting something else in there would be just fine. But you're starting the conversation by saying, I hear you.
Yeah.
Let me tell you my perspective or why I see it a little bit differently.
Or even starting it with, so what you're saying is this, and this is what I see. Right. So validating that you've understood, right? We've talked about this before, right? Understanding before trying to be understood. That's a great skill.
Oh, sure.
To be able to employ in any discussion.
Well, anytime you can listen to understand versus listening to respond, you're going to come out way ahead in any conversation. So,
and making sure that the other person understands that you have heard them properly. Right? Because if you haven't, then you're going to end up in an argument that you can't win.
Oh,
or
absolutely.
can't even understand.
Absolutely.
You're going in two different directions.
So another way, another phrase that we can use, I understand where you're coming from. Here's why I think differently.
Sure.
And again, it's another way of validating. You're also showing some empathy. Yet you're also trying to explain why you perceive the issue differently. And again, a lot of it are our own experiences, our own issues with life, giving us experiences which shape and channel our opinions.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I have given the community that we teach in, which has very limited exposure to the poor, and being able to share with the kids, well, okay, let's say that you are poor.
Yeah.
Maybe they're newly poor. Let's look at, well, how did they get here? Not that they are here.
Right.
Because their path to get here. As our community becomes more diverse, then looking at the racial makeup and say, okay, a white student is going to experience life a little differently than a black student,
Sure.
than a Hispanic student. We have a lot of folks coming from all over the world now, so they're a new immigrant, maybe first generation immigrant to the United States. So their experience will change maybe how they feel about the crisis at the border. We talk about this all the time. Build the wall, yes. Build the wall, no. Well, depending on your experience with life, your experience with immigration, your family status, is going to potentially influence how you feel of yes or no on build the wall. Yeah. And so, but again, what I like about what they're saying here is that it's not that my idea is right and your idea is wrong. It's why.
Yeah. So I'm reminded of a conversation that I had on a text chat, right? With a good friend of mine who happens to be a professor of political science in a prominent college on the East Coast. And we had this discussion about a hot political topic, somewhat political, somewhat legal. And, the discussion turns into, well, where's this thing going to go? Is this thing going to hit the Supreme Court? How's it going to play out? And the current politics of the country, those kinds of things. I don't want to get into the actual topic. It doesn't matter, right? But suffice it to say that it came down to a point where, I don't think the conversation was well received, and my professor friend had actually kind of texted that I shouldn't presume to lecture him on politics and law. I mean, let's be fair. He's got a JD, and he clearly knows a lot more things than I do. But I said, it's not that. I texted him back and I said, I completely respect your opinion. I'm just saying that what you're saying is an opinion, and I have a different opinion, and you may end up being right, just as easily as I may end up being right. And so it doesn't really matter. I hear what you're saying. I appreciate where that comes from and your experience and your knowledge and your education and the fact that you've been involved in this a lot longer than me. But I'm just saying what I see and what I believe, and I was using facts and information, right? And he said, "Oh, I completely agree." Like he misunderstood where I was coming from.
Sure.
So yeah, clarifying those things, right, and just understanding that you have an opinion and I have an opinion, and they're not, there's nobody's right necessarily yet, right? Things have to play out, especially if we're talking about something in the future, right? Some kind of political thing that the way that we think it should play out.
Sure.
They're both entirely valid.
And that,
no matter how much you dislike the other opinion,
I struggle with that.
Still could be valid.
And I think that that's where, when you get into a conversation like what you were having, either verbally or by text, though I do believe that when it's nonverbal, the
So much harder,
chances of misunderstanding go way up.
Yeah.
But when these are happening, and again, I've had them both verbally and non-verbally, like you were having, they can really get heated. And how do you kind of pump the brakes? Well, this is where, this is a good phrase, this next one, on how to kind of pump those brakes, to kind of take a deep breath and let's calm down just a little bit. And you can just simply say, look, I am feeling this way about this situation, which may be different from how you are seeing it. And when you're able to say something, and again, you can modify it to your own way, but you're simply, again, recognizing that person.
Yeah.
And you're validating them. You're not insulting them.
Right.
You're not alienating them or their opinion. You're just trying to express, we see this from two different points of view. Not that one is more right than the other, even though my way is more right. But because the point of the conversation, and I tell this to my students all the time, when I have, and we get together in our morning meetings before school during the school year, and we get some very interesting conversations, and I'm embarrassed to say that I do get a little overexcited sometimes.
Sure.
But the idea of civil discourse is for you and me to learn. And by taking somebody else's point of view, I always tell my students, it is a victory for me when I can get someone else I'm talking to go, well, you know what? I'm going to give you that. I see your point. I had not considered that particular point of view before.
Absolutely.
And if I can get that, I'm going ding, 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 ding. I have had a successful conversation.
Absolutely.
I haven't converted them to my way of thinking, because one, that would never happen. But I've gotten you to accept that there might be an alternative possibility.
Right.
And so I think, but the way you can get there when you're having these family conversations, and Thanksgiving, this comes up all the time, because kids are going, oh yeah, my uncle, my aunt, my mom.
Who disagrees at Thanksgiving?
Everybody. But if you can pause that hostility by simply, again, saying, hey, this is how I see this situation. And it's okay that you see it differently.
I think that's important, right? Like, so it's okay to disagree. And you and I can disagree on something and we can still be friends, right? And that's okay. And I think that's like, nope, you don't have to die on every hill.
No.
Right? Like you can disagree on things and move on. It's okay. Not everybody has to be the same. I mean, what a boring world it would be if we all believed exactly the same thing about everything, right? Like, I mean, ultimately that turns into like a communist society, right? Like we're just all of the same mindset, and that just, I don't think that that's interesting at all. And I don't think that leads us to learning. And so, which in turn keeps us from growing, right? So I think that the fact that people disagree on issues is great. And that's been a great thing about our country as a whole, politically, right, is that we disagree. And at times, one party or one group may end up in power and take us to a new place, and then another one does that, and they take us in different directions at different times, and we get good things out of both experiences. And so I think that we just get caught up in this idea that our way is right and everybody else is wrong, and that's just a fallacy that I think leads us down a path towards danger, right?
I totally agree. And that's why, again, I go back to the seminar that we went to about how to disagree better. And if the idea that what can we agree on? What is something
Right.
that we can agree? How can we get on the same page? And that's actually what the psychologist is also saying, that, well, what can we agree on?
Yeah.
In fact, the actual quote is, how can we get on the same page about this? What is something we can't agree as correct? Because I think that if we can recognize that something isn't working, okay, what isn't working? And again, this can be in anything, and it doesn't even have to be politics. It could be, mom and dad trying to deal with child rearing.
Sure.
It could be kids and parents having disagreement on, cell phone use or dating or whatever it might be, household rules and policies. All right. Rather than it's, well, I said so.
Yeah.
Again, well, how can we get on the same page?
Absolutism is dangerous, right?
Oh,
So
yes.
if I'm absolutely right all the time and you are absolutely wrong, that's dangerous, right? That is going to lead us down a path towards whether it's in your home or politics or government or whatever, right? It leads you down a path towards somebody being completely in control while somebody else is not.
Mm-hmm.
And those are bad things, right? We need to have everybody's voice and everybody's thoughts.
So it may not go your way.
Sure.
I've heard time and again that compromise, which has become a dirty word these days, but compromise is when you get a little of what you want. Mm-hmm. You don't get all what you want. In fact, I've heard time and again, the best compromises are when both sides walk away disappointed.
Sure.
I mean, it has...
Unless I'm buying a car. I definitely don't want to walk away disappointed when I'm buying a car.
Okay, fair point. Fair point. But, life is all about compromise. And one way to kind of help get to compromise is another handy little phrase. And it goes something like this. I am open to hearing you out, but I also want to share where I am coming from.
Yeah.
And I know it's got the word but in there that you don't like.
I hate that word.
But.
So you just negated all your comments about the word but.
Well, maybe
the word but.
I like the word in this situation as it allows a way for both sides to be recognized as having value. I value what you have to say, and I want to hear what you have to say. At the same time, but I want you to listen and hear what I have to say.
I like the word however, but...
Okay, that can work.
I just like it better than the word but that's just me, right?
Well, okay, fair point. Maybe it's a lazy English word. I don't know. I do believe that the phrase, if we can get to a point where I want to hear what you have to say, as long as you hear what I have to say.
Yeah, I think this gets back to that whole thing that, like Stephen Covey writes about so many times, right? About being, understanding before being understood. I mean, this is such an issue in our country, both in the home and political arena and certainly online, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if everybody would just, stop looking at Facebook and all the other social media sites, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we might have a better world altogether. But however, right? Those are there to stay, right?
That is true.
And so all we can do is control what we can do, right? So
that is correct.
I think of that target I see all the time. We use it. We've posted it in schools before. What is your center of control? What are the things that you can control? And the only thing you can control is you.
Yes.
And your response to things. And so if everybody would do that, we might have a better communication in all the arenas where we can communicate. And so, yeah, I mean, just accepting the fact that disagreeing is okay, and we can be okay with each other, even though we disagree, is great. I mean, I hear things out there, people saying, well, I can't date that person because they're not my political party. Who cares?
Yeah.
Why is that a big deal?
I agree.
I mean, there's just certain things that shouldn't necessarily be a big deal, right? You're getting together with a person, not with a party, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So you got to be able to disagree, whether you're husband and wife, partners,
totally
business partners, whether you're students and teachers or students themselves, friends, whatever social environment you're in, you got to be able to disagree with people and still love and care for them and be friends.
And that's, it is hard. I mean, because sometimes I believe our conversations, despite our best efforts, can be evolved. And this next phrase is a fantastic way to help calm the emotions. And the psychologist says, and again, you can phrase it any way you want, but her suggestion is when you're having this heated argument, this fight, you can walk away, but you shouldn't ignore the elephant in the room. And her way of addressing this kind of goes like this. Let's take a minute to regroup and talk when we are calm and have had a minute to think about what we want to say next.
So, yeah, I mean, I think
kind of like put a pin in it.
Yeah, I think silence is good. It lets people reflect. It lets people think about, their own thoughts, how whatever it is affects them. How is it going to affect the relationship if I respond a certain way? I mean, reflection, we've talked about many times, is important.
And I think that in this case, you're recognizing that you can even simply say, look, I'm getting too emotional about this. So I need to, let's before we say something that we will ultimately regret,
sure,
let's put a pin in this. I need to take a pause. I'll be back.
Right.
And again, the conversations are important to be held, but the conversations when they de-evolve, can lead to hurtful statements. And sometimes I'm going to say something that I don't know that I really mean it, but if I can piss you off and make you angry, now I can't score points the other way, so I'll score a point playing dirty.
Sure. Well, the minute you tell me I'm wrong, I'm done.
You're wrong.
Right. Like if you're just going to tell me, I'm wrong, without, you could acknowledge and disagree, but if you're just going to tell me I'm wrong, then all that says to me is you think you're right. Okay. And that's back to the absolutes, right? Like I'm absolutely wrong and you're absolutely right. Well, I'm done with you because there's no convincing you of any other way. You can't be closed-minded on these things, right? And no matter what the discussion is, like you have to give respect to the other person that they can have a valid opinion and a valid take on it. And that their take on it is based on their experience, which may not be the same as yours.
And that brings me to the last piece of advice that the psychologist provides. And I think maybe she was saving the best for last.
Okay.
I want to see your side. Help me understand your point of view.
Sure.
Because now that to me allows them to move past an emotional response. And, you can inquire, what's your evidence? Like you were mentioning before, and I agree. I do the same thing with my students all the time.
Sure.
I don't care what you believe, just back it up.
Right.
Give me some evidence. Give me some facts. Give me some information to help explain why you believe what you believe.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a way to say to this other person that's on the other side of an argument, disagreement, whatever. And again, it can be a spouse, it can be a coworker, it can be your child. Help me understand why you believe what you believe.
Sure.
And voila, it gives now you've lowered that emotional level. You can rise the intellectual conversation, and maybe we can get somewhere.
Yeah. Yep. I think that's great. I mean, again, acknowledgement.
Mm-hmm.
And demonstrating that acknowledgement, not just saying, I see your point, right? Reflecting that point back so that you can actually have that conversation and allow that person to clarify, because maybe you think you see the point,
Mm-hmm.
but you actually don't, right? So reflecting back what you think they mean, and then allowing them to correct that if they see something that's wrong with what you've heard.
And that, I mean, again, we're always going to have conversations, family discussions, work discussions, political discussions, doesn't matter what it's going to be. But the way that we can have conversations, intelligent, intellectual conversations that can have a little bit of emotion, but not de-evolve into yelling, screaming fights that cause hostility, anger, and hurt feelings. Well, to quote Governor Cox, let's learn how to disagree better.
Agreed.
So that's my advice for today. I think I will have to put these 7 phrases on some kind of bulletin board and put them in my room so
Sure.
I can remember them better and refer to them often. But
I like it.
So anyway, I think we went a little more than our 30 minutes today, so I sincerely apologize, but I had fun talking about this.
I think it's an important topic. So,
well, then until next time, I guess I'll be Ron.
And I'm Scott.
See ya.
Bye-bye.